Let's face it, when it comes to fan favorite characters in pop culture, sometimes it basically boils down to, well, looking cool. I mean, a compelling backstory can help, but I'd argue that it's the element of mystery that allows us to build the perfect character in our minds. Take the bounty hunter Boba Fett, for example. He basically spent most of his time in The Empire Strikes Back just standing around. And when he finally saw some action in Return of the Jedi, well, that was pretty much it. Until he returned over 40 years later as a bland, bald senior, now with a heart of gold. Hardly what I'd call a compelling character resume. And yet, here we are. Boba Fett, one of the most popular characters in the Star Wars universe. Oh wait, sorry. Wrong Mandalorian. I don't know about you, but as far as I'm concerned, there's just something intrinsically cool about the concept of a bounty hunter. Granted, as a kid, my idea of a bounty hunter was synonymous with a bunch of ugly-looking scum hired by Vader to hunt down the Millennium Falcon. As I grew older, I learned to appreciate these characters who weren't exactly good or evil, but worked as operatives who were hired to, well, hunt down individuals, who oftentimes would be bad anyway. But seriously, how can a guy who looked like this not be awesome? Seriously though, despite their often ambiguous alignment, bounty hunters have become quite the popular archetype in many movies, shows, and even cartoons. The Transformers actually featured their own original bounty hunter in the cartoon named Devcon, who was introduced in the Season 2 episode The Gambler, wherein he helped the Autobots smokescreen rescue Optimus Prime and his fellow Autobots from the gangster Guy Coney. Anyway, even that obscure one-off character gained quite the cult following, enough to earn him his own toy almost 40 years later. But wait, this story isn't about Devcon, but another, dare I say more, iconic bounty hunter in the Transformers franchise. And no, I'm not referring to Axer, although more on him later. For this story, I'd like to lock in on the bounty hunter Lockdown. So in 2007, a new Transformers show simply called Transformers Animated made its debut. And aside from introducing us to a very unique, and for some, very controversial stylistic interpretation of our favorite robots in disguise, we also got a bunch of new and unique characters in the series, most notable of which, in my opinion, was the bounty hunter Lockdown. Now, unlike familiar G1 characters like Prowl and Blitzwing, who were given really radical character makeovers, from what I know, Lockdown was a completely new character made specifically for the show. You can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. Anyway, I remember reading an early interview given by the art director of the show, the late Derek J. Wyatt, where he talked about Lockdown and touted him as not only an all-original character, but one that he believed would turn out to be the Boba Fett of the Transformers universe. Not in the just stand around and look cool and fall into a sarlacc pit to be slowly digested over 1,000 years kind of way though, but more in the legendary menacing off-screen Boba Fett that we had all built up in our heads. But regardless of what Derek Wyatt meant with that statement, it definitely put Lockdown on a pedestal and immediately raised expectations for this upcoming character. Fortunately, I think Lockdown met those expectations in spades. While he wasn't a main character of the show, he definitely made quite the impression whenever he would show up, usually in an episode that would revolve around him. So to kick things off, visually, Lockdown was definitely quite striking. While early concepts of Lockdown had him looking like a freakish Frankenstein's monster type of dude, his design was tightened up to look more businesslike, dark, tall, and lanky, with menacing spikes riddled all over his body and topped off with a white skull-like head design with detailing that seemed to take inspiration from Japanese kabuki makeup. And while not so obvious at first, a closer look revealed a rather asymmetrical design with mismatched legs and arms, one of which ending with a large menacing weapon, usually a hook, but other times a chainsaw. This appearance told the story of a cold and calculating hunter who adorned and armed himself with parts and weapons of his targets that he kept as trophies. Oh, and to drive home the point that he had no true allegiance to either side, his badge on his chest was just a black silhouette, which was actually a nice callback to the original toys who had mysterious rub signs that had to be, well, rubbed to reveal the character's side. Lockdown was also voiced by popular television and movie actor Lance Henriksen, who is best known for playing Bishop in Alien and Frank Black in Millennium and The X-Files. Anyway, while this was kind of contested by Derek Wyatt, it's widely accepted that Lockdown was ultimately created because Hasbro wanted to have their own Death's Head character to do with as they pleased. An alternate bounty hunter, if you will. For those not familiar, Death's Head was a cyborg bounty hunter that was used quite often in the Transformers UK comics, but whose rights ultimately belonged to Marvel. In any case, a firm connection to the original Death's Head was maintained in the animated series, as Death's Head was used for the name of Lockdown's ship. So Lockdown's very first appearance was in the Season 1 episode called The Thrill of the Hunt, where he is hired by the Decepticons to take down Optimus Prime, whom they believe was responsible for killing off Megatron. I mean, he wasn't really dead, but they thought he was. Which basically leads to Lockdown initially stalking and harassing the Autobots in his very unique alt mode, a mix of a 1980s Corvette and a 1960s Cougar, with lots of spikes and a cowcatcher on his bumper. Anyway, it isn't long before Lockdown is recognized by the resident old-time veteran of the Autobot team, Ratchet, who had a previous run-in with the bounty hunter a long time ago in Cybertron. Needless to say, it wasn't a pleasant experience for the old doctor, as it involved him losing a horn on his head and forcing him to use his EMP device to wipe out the memory of fellow Autobot RC to prevent Lockdown from obtaining codes in her brain for Megatron. He also lost his EMP device to Lockdown and was left with a severe case of PTSD. In the present day though, Ratchet manages to overcome his PTSD and more importantly, outsmart Lockdown, rescue Prime, and recover his EMP device. Anyway, this relationship with Ratchet is something that will be revisited upon years later, but we'll get to that in a bit. Another Autobot that Lockdown apparently shares a past with in the show would be Prowl, now reimagined as a sleek cyber ninja. Still a police vehicle though. Anyway, it turns out that Lockdown was also a cyber ninja, trained by the same master as Prowl, Master Yokitron, voiced by the default actor for all old and wise Asian characters, George Takei. So as the story goes, Lockdown is kicked out of the Cyber Ninja Corps for an undisclosed but most likely dastardly reason, and exacts his revenge by leading an attack on the Cyber Ninja Dojo, which results in the death of Master Yokitron. Oh my! It would be much later on before Prowl would learn the truth behind his master's killer, and in fact, in the present day, Prowl finds himself in an uneasy alliance with Lockdown as they work together to track down and capture Starscream. Lockdown even goes as far as supplying Prowl with some armor and weapon upgrades that conveniently transform into a nice sidecar for his motorcycle mode. Seriously, the fact that Hasbro designers managed to translate this into a fairly accurate toy is quite amazing. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Best Transformers toy line ever, in my opinion. And speaking of the best, do you know who the best of the best viewers are out there? Well, that's easy. It's all you guys watching right now. I've continuously interacted with so many of you for quite some time now that as far as I'm concerned, I'm happy to call you all friends of the Toy Shelf. And as my friends, I'd like to offer all of you extra perks like episode shoutouts, input on future stories, early access to my main content, and extremely early access to additional exclusive content through my channel membership, which you can lock down by clicking on the join button on my main channel page. And better yet, there is no lock-in period. Try it out for a bit, and if it's not your cup of tea, then we can get back to old regular times. No harm, no foul, and no disintegrations. Anyway, sorry, I got off track there. So back to Prowl and Lockdown. As expected, this alliance didn't last long, but to be fair, I believe Lockdown genuinely did like working with Prowl, as he never stopped trying to fully recruit him into the bounty hunter lifestyle as his partner. Of course, Prowl would have none of that. Either way, it showed that Lockdown wasn't closed off with the prospect of having a partner, or at the very least, a protege, as we will see later on. And just to be clear that despite Lockdown's rather shady character, he wasn't a full-fledged Decepticon, and his loyalty ultimately went to the highest bid, without going over. In the episode 5 Servos of Doom, Lockdown takes a job from the Autobots, Well, to be fair, he was hired by the elite guard Sentinel Prime, who was a bona fide a-hole, who paid Lockdown with precious devices from his own ship to hunt down Decepticons just so that he could get all the credit. In the end, Lockdown's Decepticon targets offered to pay him a lot more, and so ultimately, he double-crossed Sentinel Prime. But cool cartoon depiction aside, it was pretty obvious that Hasbro really wanted to push Lockdown as one of the top characters of the show, as he was the only Decepticon Deluxe release in the first wave of the animated series. And it was quite the toy, coming in a rather cutting-edge, angular, and fearsome-looking car, but transforming into a really tall and menacing robot. I mean, seriously, he practically doubled the length of the car in height, and was as tall or taller than most of the Voyager toys in the line. Unfortunately though, his toy came with one design flaw, and that was his hands, which ended up in a really awkward inward-facing angle. I remember trying to fix it and ended up breaking his wrist. One cool feature, however, was that he came with Ratchet's stolen EMP device, which doubled up as his car's engine. Anyway, this EMP could also be removed and attached to the Ratchet toy, mimicking their rivalry from the series. So yeah, Lockdown made quite the impression on a lot of fans, so much so that he was the first animated character to successfully cross over to the live-action movie Transformers Bayverse. Now, while he wasn't an actual character in the second movie, Revenge of the Fallen, the toy line did feature a Bayversified Lockdown toy. Basically, the animated Lockdown with much more detailing, making him even more menacing. Unfortunately, the toy's construction was left wanting as his arms were attached by pretty shallow and soft ball joints, which were prone to popping off all the time. But despite its fragility, visually it was an awesome looking toy which had two interesting things about it, in my opinion. First was that it was repainted and retooled into another character named Axor. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because this was meant to be an homage to the older and previously mentioned Action Master, Axor, who I said earlier was also a bounty hunter. So in this iteration, Axor was now a fully fledged Transformer who was the protege of Lockdown. See, I told you he liked some company. Anyway, it's explained that Axor idolized Lockdown so much that he literally remodeled his body to look like him. See, Hasbro does put effort into their characterizations sometimes. The second interesting bit about this Lockdown toy was that it was used as the basis for his look in future iterations of the Bounty Hunter, most notably in the IDW Transformers comics. See, granted it was originally meant to be a live-action Bayverse design, this Lockdown could pretty much pass for something out of Generation 1. Well, at least the hyper-stylized look of most of the IDW Transformers books. Anyway, in this universe, Lockdown is best known for being the main antagonist in the Drift miniseries, wherein he is hired to track a Decepticon turncoat named Dead Lockdown, who eventually changes his name to Drift. Needless to say, he wasn't successful in his mission. Another modern version worth mentioning would be Lockdown from the Cyberverse series, who also kinda used this look. Anyway, I myself never really watched Cyberverse, but from what little I know, this Lockdown was basically Lockdown in name and appearance alone. No longer a fearsome bounty hunter, but a low-level Decepticon who was partnered up with another equally low-ranking Decepticon, Clobber, who looked like another original Transformers animated character, the Decepticon Lugnut, who in the original show apparently hated Lockdown. So I find it quite amusing that they ended up as BFFs in the Cyberverse. To be fair though, even if they did look similar, Clobber wasn't Lugnut. I mean, Cyberverse story editor Randolph Hurd wanted to use Lugnut, albeit a gender-swapped Lugnut in the show. But Hasbro wanted to keep the name Lugnut associated with a male character, so instead allowed him to create a female version named Clobber. And that's all I have to say about those two. The final modern iteration of Lockdown that I'd like to mention based on this look would be the Legacy version in 2024. While the original toy was released as another character, the traitorous Junkion Axel Grease, everyone and their mother saw all the details like angular-shaped muscle car, hook hand, and asymmetrical design pointing to the inevitable bounty hunter retool. It was a decent attempt, and the whole modular parts forming play pattern of this particular toy did fit Lockdown's penchant for mismatched body parts and weapons. But ultimately, I found the base Lockdown a little too small and not very intimidating, so I ended up passing on him. Anyway, while the original live-action Lockdown was basically a toy line stuffer for the second movie, it wouldn't be long before the bounty hunter would be called up to the live-action movie big leagues for real, this time as the main bad guy of the fourth movie, The Age of Extinction. So as always, this new iteration of Lockdown is still a bounty hunter, now hired by the mysterious creators to hunt down their rogue knights. And apparently, this Lockdown is
pretty good
at what he does, as by the start of the movie, he has already captured most of the knights, except one. And he arrives on Earth to hunt down the last knight. Sorry, that's the next movie, Optimus Prime. Now, who didn't see that coming? And right off the bat, he makes quite the debut as he takes down and kills his favorite frenemy, Ratchet, who refuses to give up the location of Prime and gets his spark ripped out of his chest for his defiance. Also, to expedite his hunt, Lockdown partners up with the CIA Black Ops organization, Cemetery Wind, headed by a certain Harold Attinger, who you could say is quite a beast of a man and can hear the blues a-callin', toss salad, and scrambled eggs. Seriously though, Cemetery Wind is tasked with hunting down and eliminating all Transformers, Autobots, and Decepticons. Good thing Lockdown is neither. And so the bounty hunter offers his services to the group, figuring that killing off more Autobots would eventually force Prime out of hiding, which it does. And at that point, Lockdown easily takes him out with a really huge long-range gun that sprouts from his head. Eventually though, Prime, with the help of his remaining Autobots, manages to escape, along with all the other imprisoned knights who turn out to be the rather fearsome and humongous Dinobots, Grimlock, Slag, Scorn, and Swoop. How convenient is that? And in the climactic battle in Hong Kong, while the Autobots and Dinobots rip through the Decepticon forces, Lockdown takes on Optimus Prime himself. But unfortunately for him, this version of Prime isn't the benevolent leader that we grew up with in the cartoons. This Prime is the face-ripping, spine-pulling, brain-busting, human-blasting
Frazier has left the building
kind of dude. And so for his trouble, Lockdown gets Prime's blade jammed through his chest and his head split in half, just for good measure. Anyway, it's worth noting that this Lockdown looked nothing like the Revenge of the Fallen Lockdown. In fact, I'd argue that he was rather plain looking, probably one of the most humanoid looking Bayverse designs out there. Well, I mean, if you don't count his gun head, that is. Early concepts had him looking a little closer to his asymmetrical animated look, and he definitely looked more sinister and creepy, sporting a long sniper rifle and his victims' trophies, i.e. parts hanging off his chest. And at one point even sported a ragged-looking poncho, something his animated version also wore at times. It was even rumored that Christopher Walken's face served as inspiration for early concepts. Nah, I don't see it. Maybe if they added a little bit more cowbell. But possibly the biggest departure for this Lockdown would be his alt mode, which was no longer a fearsome-looking Mad Max-styled muscle car. Well, at one point he was still a muscle car. In the end, Lockdown transformed into a very sleek and stylish black Lamborghini Aventador LP700-4 coupe. Cause you know, paid advertisement for Lamborghini's brand new sports car. Oh, and the one they actually used on the set was personally owned by Mr. Bay himself. As you could imagine, having an almost humanoid-looking robot transform into a compact and sleek sports car would be quite the task for Hasbro designers. And as expected, the original Lockdown toy and the slightly improved Studio Series version didn't quite capture what we saw on screen. I mean, kibble is a real problem. Not that I really cared, as at the time I wasn't collecting any mainline Bayverse stuff. But on the Masterpiece front, well, let's just say that Lockdown was the recipient of possibly one of the best Bayverse, actually Masterpiece in general, toys ever made. Seriously. Peru Kill, released in 2018 by third-party company Unique Toys, who at the time had gained the reputation of making mostly meh G1 masterpiece toys, really caught everyone off guard with this one. From an almost seamless alt mode to a virtually kibble-less bot mode, and an intuitive, non-headache inducing, and dare I say, fun transformation between modes, this guy is by no exaggerations an engineering marvel and a true masterpiece. Seriously, if you haven't handled this guy, check out some online reviews. Anyway, while at the time I wasn't collecting any Masterpiece Baver stuff yet, I was so impressed by what I saw that when I came across him in a store ironically in Hong Kong, the city lockdown tried to destroy in his hunt for Prime, he was an instant impulse buy. And I have not regretted it at all. In fact, this guy was the spark that lit up my Masterpiece Baver's collecting fire. How poetic. And as an added bonus, he even came with one of the wolf-like pets that he traveled with on his ship. The cherry on top of this excellent toy. Well deserved for an original character who pretty much made history for crossing over from the animated world and into the live-action realm. But did you know that there was another character who did the opposite? As in, start out in the live action and then cross over to the animated series. And that would be the Decepticon Blackout, the very first live action Transformer we would see on screen, and who was also coincidentally armed with an EMP device. If you want to know more about this electronics and communications disruptor, I've got his story over here. Or if you want other Transformer stories, you can check out this playlist over here. Either way, thanks for watching, and I hope you come back for more.